So moving from the sea and from noise, we're going to move into onto the beach. And Andrew Watt's going to talk about the literal characterisation of West Mainland Orkney, the relationship between wave energy, topology, and the biological community.
Thank you very much. My name is Andrew Watt. I'm from the Orkney campus at Harry Watt University. And I want to talk to you about some of the work I do on the littoral shoreline around Orkney. Here I am cutting a very lonely figure on the littoral shoreline. I'm also talking about flora as well as fauna, so my apologies to all the animal people in the crowd tonight. Where we're based is, of course, in Orkney. You all know where Orkney is. It's there. We're also doing some work on the northwest corner of Lewis, which also you all know where that is as well. So I'll be talking a little bit about that as well. What these two sites share is an extreme wave fetch, both located in the North Atlantic, and there's about 3,000 kilometers if you look out west from these areas across. So an incredible wave environment, which both creates a dynamic and a spectacular shoreline, attracting attention and both extracting the energy as well as protection of this very beautiful landscape. You've seen this before, you all know this well. This wave energy resource, of course, has led to the leasing as such. And of course, this is a very, very important area, and that's where I do most of my littoral work, so intertidal survey work along the rocky shores. What we're looking at when we characterize these shorelines is both the topography as well as the biological community. The topography in Orkney is a little bit special in that it is extremely planar, quite uncomplicated, and you get these very, very elegant platforms descending down to the shoreline, typically varying between 4 and 19 degrees, often dealing with leading to very elegant zonation of organisms along the shoreline. In addition to doing a topographical characterization, we're also looking at the biology, of course, the biological assemblages. Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing it firstly because most of it has never been described before. We're also doing it as a way of establishing baseline before there is development, and also there's a large area where there will be control sites far distant from the actual development of the sites. And lastly, an identification of potential sentinel species or habitats of particular interest which may be of value in long-term monitoring of the area. What are we looking at? Well, I'm looking at intertidal invertebrates as well as seaweed. So these are all fairly well-known organisms that you'll be familiar with. And there are a variety of species within each group, some of which may be more adapted towards a higher energy environment, some adapted more towards a lower energy environment. And so we're looking at quite a variety of different species across that spectrum. Where are we doing this? Well, it's along West Mainland Orkney, and as I mentioned, most of it hasn't been assessed. About 70% of the shoreline is actually inaccessible by foot. So I have to do this work by going on a rib and getting dropped off at the bottom of platforms and cliffs. And obviously I'm still here, so they've picked me back up again. But it's quite a hairy sort of environment at times. Notice that there is a general north-south and very, very simple sort of straight, not very many embayments. So using a cartographic fetch-based modeling of this is very helpful, but it doesn't always get to the subtleties that you find on this very, very straight topographical features you find here. In addition to these Orkney sites here, we have done some work last summer here in Lewis, in particular sites along the northwest facing. And just to point out, there is one site around the corner of the butt of Lewis, which is a very different topography, different orientation, and much more similar to Orkney that we'll mention at some later point, I hope. Okay, what are we looking at when we take topographical indices? Well, we've developed our approach, which captures the main facets of variability in wave energy interaction. These include the slope, so the angle of the rocks. We're looking at openness, how broad it is to different fetch directions. What is the average of that openness? Is it pointing towards the north? Is it pointing towards the south, where there may be islands and things that are interfering with it? We're looking at aspects, so how the rocks are oriented, again, in space, cardinal direction. Also, a semi-quantitative measure of complexity, where we're looking at the presence or absence of reefs or boulders or other features which we might expect to complicate the interaction between wave energy and the biological the biology. We're also taking semi-quantitative measures of exposure, and we hope to add with this, quantify it by adding bathymetry, knowledge of bathymetry, wave energy, and wind data also. From a biological standpoint, we have a list of about 40 organisms or so which we try to look for on these shorelines, and then we do an assessment which is called a SAC4 evaluation. If you're not familiar with this, if you're not an ecologist, this is a way of determining abundance on the shoreline. Okay, our first attempt to analyze the data was looking at principal component analysis. In your extended abstract, you can find that, and I'll be happy to discuss that, but we took it one step further by instructing the principal component analysis and producing this redundancy analysis we have here, where we've instructed it with some environmental variables of note, including exposure, the slope, and complexity. And you see that various sites, the sites are indicated by either L or O, L for Lewis, O for Orkney, are being drawn to the environmental variables that are the most influencing them. And also we find the different organisms, Hymenthalia and Alaria, and they're being drawn in various directions depending upon which environmental variable they're most, correlated with. So, to show you a couple of examples of some sites, here's one site here. Now, the topography, these are various values that we took. It has a slope of 16 degrees. This actually is very steep if you're standing on it. 16 degrees, if you step onto some porphyra, you're quite likely to end up in the drink, as they say. So it's quite a challenging environment to work in. But it has these various other topographical features that I have here. Now, about a kilometer further south of this, very close to where the cable fall is planned for the wave area, you get almost identical topography in all sorts of ways, except the slope is only 4 degrees. So very, very different slope, yet otherwise very, very similar. And if we look at that back on that redundancy analysis, that the very steep site is this one here, associated again with organisms of high energy and high slope. And the other site was this one, O13, a site with low energy organisms that you find there. And again, the only main difference in this topographically is the slope. Looking at some SAC4 values here. Oh, sorry, let me go back again. And you notice that the Lewis sites, there's a whole bunch of Lewis sites, all here, complex sites away from the exposure, not drawn away to exposure or slope. These are all the Lewis sites, except for the one Lewis site here, which is that site that I mentioned above or beyond Port Ness, pointing northeast, which you find right there. There's a whole conglomeration of Orkney sites that are high exposure, high slope, and lots of sub-Orkney sites found in this lower, drawn towards lower energy, more complex, lower slope sites. So I've taken a group of these together to look at them a bit more closely and looking at the SAC4 values. The SAC4 values I've enumerated from a 0 to 6 point scale. Now, strictly what I've done is actually not correct, even I've taken an average of the SAC4 scales, but it's simply as an illustrative purposes, so don't come with some flag. But what I want to point out here is, if we look at the comparison between Orkney sites, I've got 6 of the most energetic sites and 6 of the lower energetic sites, and we find, for example, there's no dog whelks on the high energy sites. You don't get fucus fasciculosus, you get the high energy fucus disticus. I should clarify, 6 is, if you will, maximum abundant, super abundant. And likewise, you get the high energy kelp alaria, but you don't get laminaria. That's intertidal laminaria, clarify. You do get plenty of subtidal. We're also looking at patella ulysses, and you get lots and lots and lots of it, percentage-wise, in the high energy and comparatively lower on the low energy sites. Comparatively, looking at those low energy Orkney sites and Lewis, we get actually really quite similar values. You get very little disticus, and essentially the values are all fairly similar. And of interest, that one particular site, only one I recognize, the one site on Lewis has very, very, very similar comparisons with the high energy sites on Orkney, and in fact the site resembles Orkney very much. It's slanted, it's very steeply sloped, and very simple, planar, complex, non-complex. If anyone knows Lewis's Rocky Shore ecology, I based this and got a local artist to make this. It's the first time it's been shown in public, so I'm very I really like this diagram being made here, but this is a schematic showing the type of organisms you would find on a higher slope shore of Orkney. Again, very planar, very simple type of rock platform, lots and lots of alaria, and a band of the high energy fucoid Fucus disticus. Comparatively, at a lower slope side, we find Laminaria digitata, we find Hymenthalia, and we find now, instead of Fucus disticus, we find Fucus vesiculosus. There is a transition that's occurring, in this case, towards lower energy species, and the main topographical difference between these is the slope. I'm belaboring the point a tiny bit, but looking at bathymetrically, looking at 3 sites that are 16 degrees, 12 degrees, and 8 degrees, we find with the 16-degree site, you get into deep water very, very quickly offshore. With the 12-degree site, you get into a little bit further out to get into the deep water, and with the shallow one, it takes a long way out to get to it. Quite simply put, the shallowness of the slope on the shore extends sublitterally, but what this means, of course, is that you're getting dissipation of wave energy far off, so that by the time it hits the shoreline here, you've had sufficient dissipation of wave energy that you're getting much lower energy species associated with these types of landscapes, seascapes. Looking at those on the redundancy analysis that I pointed out to you earlier, here's the 16-degree slope associated with high exposure organisms, here's the 12-degree slope, and here's the 8-degree slope. We have been quantifying, attempting to quantify wave energy. You all know this is a very, very difficult issue. We have a terabuoy device which has been developed in-house by Bob Bahari, and he has a poster, so I want to draw your attention to this, that this is helping, it's supporting the evidence that we're doing, and I want to draw your attention to this point. Here's an interesting example of a site I want to point out too, and this is called the Bowskerry. Extreme high energy site, the highest energy fucoids, alaria, and organisms associated with high energy. And right behind it are platforms that are identical topographically, except of course they have this gigantic skerry sitting in front of them. So not surprisingly, there is lower energy organisms down here, but interestingly enough, they are of course ones you'd very much associate with being a totally exposed, open, we should say, slope, but of a shoreline, but of a lower slope. So in conclusion of what we've made from our various findings, I guess the first conclusion to make is that littoral sites have some advantages. There's some clear advantage to working in a littoral environment, and it is possible that what you learn on the littoral shore may be able to be reveal processes occurring in deeper waters. The second one is that you can compare sites of varying exposure, looking at different assemblages, and possibly be able to make predictions of what may happen upon energy extraction. I also come to the conclusion that fetch-based cartographic models are very valuable, but the inclusion of topography enhances them, and that may include bathymetry as well. Our data support the postulation that the variations in topography are the major causes of changes in the rocky shore community. And also that Orkney is basically, it's fair to say, is a relatively streamlined, a fairly unusual example of these very planar shorelines. And that in contrast, Lewis is far more complex and quite different in what you find. So in doing with Lewis, owing to the increased substrate complexity and the lower slow shore, we get lots of energy dissipation prior to the waves reaching the shore on Lewis. So you get organisms which are associated with a comparatively low energy environment. So Lewis, you get tremendous wave resource, but when you actually look on the rocky shore itself, you're not getting, that's not represented quite so clearly. So the last point on this, the conclusion, is that with these complex and gentle slopes on Lewis, we would not expect that the extraction of energy would have profound effects on the shoreline, and instead we would recommend that if you are doing monitoring on the shores of Lewis, that a sublittoral program might be of greater benefit. And so our continuation of this is we're going to be looking at some additional sites in Lewis this summer, as well as filling in a few gaps in Orkney. and we're going to be merging this with some empirical data. I have been taking specific recordings on barnacles, patella, and also high-energy fucoids. And lastly, we hope to incorporate a greater knowledge of the surf zone hydrodynamics, again, on varying slopes and complexities of the shoreline. So I just want to end by saying a big thank you to my co-authors, Mike Bell, who you met earlier, and John Side, as well as various folks who have helped with shore work both here in Orkney and in Puss. Thank you very much.
We have time for one quick question. Yeah, Andrew. Okay.
Okay, thank you.